Imagine you finally bought a house to enjoy peace, but then you become the target of those who are envious and like to control others. If those who abuse their power sabotage your beloved car, what would you do? I am Jonathan Carter, a retired businessman who has spent nearly 30 years in the business world. My current life is a perfect combination of success, tranquility, and the joys of later life. I bought a small neighborhood on the outskirts of the city to enjoy the rest of my days. This neighborhood isn't ordinary. It's an upscale residential area featuring classic-style mansions, enclosed walls, clean streets, and private entrances. The houses here all belong to wealthy families who live a very leisurely life. This neighborhood is quiet, peaceful, and truly an ideal place for me to spend my remaining years. When I decided to move here, I thought I would find the serenity I had always sought. But I was wrong. After a few months of living here, I realized something was amiss. Some residents didn't seem to welcome me. They didn't say it outright, but I could sense it from their looks, their whispers, and even the small gestures they made. They looked at me as though I were a stranger, someone who didn't belong here. Not the kind of person who likes to show off, but I'm also not afraid to live according to my own standards. On weekend evenings, I often host small parties by the pool. I invite friends who are influencers in business and politics. We drink fine wine, listen to classical music, and talk about important matters in life. To me, these are priceless moments that I don't want to miss. But to others, these parties seem like excessive displays of extravagance. My yellow Lamborghini Urus is exactly what bothers them. I'm not someone who likes to brag, but I've worked hard my entire life to have it. Driving this car, I don't just take pride in my own achievements, but I also want to enjoy the life I deserve. Yet in their eyes, the car symbolizes incompatibility. They feel it's too different, too conspicuous compared to the more average cars in the neighborhood. Honestly, I don't understand why people pay me so much attention. Then there's a woman in the neighborhood, Marty, the representative of the Homeowners Association, who started keeping an eye on me. Marty is a middle-aged woman living in a massive mansion at the end of the street. She seems very proud of her power within the Ho. In fact, she's been the Ho president for a long time. She has always felt she has the right to control and uphold the rules of this neighborhood. I got the sense that Marty didn't like me from the very first time we met. She always looked at me with suspicion, as if I were trespassing on her territory. I knew she disliked me, but I didn't care. That seemed to be just the beginning of a series of unexpected events I could never have imagined. One morning, while enjoying a hot cup of coffee in my living room, I happened to glance out the window and saw a piece of paper stuck to the windshield of my Lamborghini. I stepped outside and saw that it was an whole notice accusing me of violating parking regulations. My heart beat a bit faster as I read the words. It was the first time it had ever received such a notice, and I couldn't believe the Ho could interfere with the way I parked my car. Right after that, I noticed a group of people standing by the gate, along with Marty and the whole security team. This group seemed to be preparing for something very serious. Marty stood there, arms folded, looking at me as though I were a criminal. The whole security members looked at me defiantly, and I could feel the tension in the air. Marty, with an undisguised look of envy, stepped forward and pointed at my Lamborghini, speaking in a confrontational tone. "Mr. Carter, this car doesn't meet the standards of our neighborhood. Its color is too flashy. It doesn't fit the general aesthetic of the neighborhood. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to resort to stronger measures." I stood still, not reacting. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. I gave a slight smile, relaxed my arms, and replied with an odd sense of calm. "My car is parked in my garage. It can't bother anyone." The host security, with a haughty expression, began pounding on my car's hood and said, "When I say so, it means so." She continued in a commanding tone, "Move your car right now. Otherwise, we'll do it for you." I didn't say anything more, just looked at them, a faintly mocking smile flashing across my lips. It was the first time in my life someone had dared to challenge me like that. The story didn't end there. While I still stood there, arms folded, watching them, Marty and the whole security team began to take more drastic action. They decided to label my car a violator and even stuck more violation notices all over it. The whole neighborhood started gathering, many people taking out their phones to film the incident. Some felt it was excessive, while others seemed to agree with the HOA's actions. Marty began calling for support from the surrounding residents. She kept shouting that I was defying the neighborhood's common rules. She even approached me, sneering and saying I would pay for not adhering to HOA regulations. And then the next day, when the tow truck was about to arrive, I had an unsettling feeling. The people around were still there, many looking at me in confusion. Meanwhile, the whole security members began to gloat, and some in the group intentionally tapped on my car's mirrors as if to display their power. My beloved car was towed away and was mercilessly vandalized by those people. I just wanted to end this peacefully, but they didn't want that. At that moment, some residents began speaking out in protest. "This has gone too far. It's just a car. Why go that far?" I knew it was time to take action, to make them pay. I took out my phone and made a secret call. A moment later, a black SUV sped into the neighborhood. The door opened, and a middle-aged man, dressed smartly, stepped out. He was my lawyer. Marty, seeing him, seemed to be in shock. I walked up, removed my $1,200 Cartier sunglasses, and calmly said, "Before you lay a hand on my car, perhaps you should check the ownership papers for this area." Marty looked at me, sneering, and asked, "What papers?" I didn't answer, just gently signaled my lawyer. He held up a stack of documents, speaking slowly and calmly. "The entire neighborhood, from the roads to each house, is owned by Jonathan Carter. He is the sole landowner here." I continue, "You've gone too far. I'll make sure you're all gone from here and pay for what you've done." Marty stood there, speechless, her expression changing color, as though her entire world, one she had controlled for so long, had just crumbled before her eyes. Her lips quivered, trying to form words but failing at first. As mocking laughter rose from some of the surrounding residents, she clenched her fist, her nails almost digging into her palms, her gaze sweeping around in desperation. The once arrogant and confident HOA security members now looked like a group of mercenaries abandoned on the battlefield. Some instinctively backed away, sweat forming on their foreheads. One of them swallowed hard, looking to Marty for orders, but this time she had no response. Finally, as if summoning the last ounce of courage she had left, Marty gritted her teeth and hissed, "This can't be. You're lying. No one can own the entire neighborhood." Her voice was loud but lacked its usual certainty. It trembled with anger and was laced with fear. I smirked, maintaining my composure, while my lawyer calmly placed the stack of documents in front of her and spoke in a measured tone. "All of this is legally certified. You can check again, but it won't change the truth." Marty trembled, a flicker of panic in her eyes as she took the stack of papers, flipping through each page like she was trying to find a loophole. But there was none. The brutal truth hit her squarely, undeniable and absolute. The whispers around us grew louder. Some residents looked at each other, some smiling, others just standing there, silently witnessing the downfall of the whole. At that moment, a luxury black car slowly drove into the neighborhood, stopping right in front of the gathering crowd. The door opened, and out stepped a dignified middle-aged man wearing a well-tailored suit. It was the city mayor. His arrival immediately drew everyone's attention. Conversations hushed, and a few people even stepped back to make way. Marty, despite her panic, tried to straighten up, but I noticed her hands were clasped tightly, as if she was trying to keep them from shaking. The mayor slowly walked over to me, shook my hand in a friendly manner, then turned to face Marty, his gaze calm yet carrying a certain authority. "I've received word about what's been happening here," he said, his voice clear and commanding. "I personally reviewed the legal records, and I can confirm that Mr. Carter is the rightful owner of this entire area, including the land the HOA has been managing without authorization." His words rang like a death knell for Marty. She stood there, stunned, her eyes blinking repeatedly, as if unable to believe what she'd just heard. "No, this can't be," she blurted out in protest, her voice trembling. "How can he own the entire neighborhood? No one has that power." The mayor shook his head slightly, sighing as though disappointed by her obstinacy. "Marty," he said in a firm tone, "you've been in charge of this hole for many years, but your power never exceeded the limits of the law. Your actions, attempting to seize private property, imposing baseless rules, are not only abuse of power, but also a serious violation of the law. And now, this matter is over." Marty shook her head repeatedly, her eyes darting toward the crowd of residents as if hoping someone would stand up for her. But this time, no one spoke up. Those who once supported her simply stood still, avoiding her gaze. Some even nodded in agreement with the mayor's words. Marty staggered back a step, as though all her strength had been drained. She had fought to maintain her power, but now even the local government had confirmed her downfall. I stood there, arms folded, looking at her calmly. "Do you believe it now?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of satisfaction. Marty didn't respond. She just stood there, her eyes blank, her lips pressed tight, without a single word of defense. Her game was over. Silence fell, a frightening silence. Marty stood frozen, her face drained of color. Some residents began to jeer, and the host security looked unsure of what to do next. They started to back away, sweat trickling down their foreheads. The entire neighborhood seemed to reel from the shock. From that point on, the hole was dissolved. Marty was forced to step down, and the entire neighborhood changed. Marty wasn't just forced to resign. She faced serious charges for abuse of power, harassing residents, and making decisions without legal basis. Forcibly seizing private property, like my car, without legal documents was a civil violation. And I wasn't going to let that be forgotten. 2 months after the incident, a court session took place. I didn't appear in public, but my team of lawyers did. They presented clear evidence: audio recordings of whole meetings, video footage from residents capturing Marty giving orders to tow my car, the absurd violation notices posted on my car as a way to publicly humiliate me in front of the entire neighborhood. Marty, once powerful and smug, now looked worn out. She sat there, trying to stay composed, but she couldn't hide the anxiety in her eyes. When the judge read the indictment, she clutched the arms of her chair, while the former host security members glanced nervously at each other. "Mrs. Marty," the judge said gravely, "you abused your authority in your role with the HOA, violated residents' personal property rights, and engaged in threatening behavior that does not comply with current laws. Now, you must face the consequences." My lawyer stood, presenting a document. "We have evidence that Mrs. Marty exerted pressure on other residents in the neighborhood, forcing them to follow rules not found in their home purchase agreements. Those who resisted were harassed by the HOA through violation notices or threats of fines." Testimony from other residents began to surface. One woman stood up, her hands trembling. I was fined by the HOA for having a small statue on my lawn. They said it didn't fit the neighborhood's aesthetic, but in reality, it was because it protested some of the HOA's decisions in the past. A middle-aged man added, "They told me to repaint my garage door because the natural wood color was too outdated. I refused, and they immediately sent me a notice saying I was violating a maintenance uniformity rule. But when I checked the whole bylaws, there was no such rule." Marty hung her head, unable to refute. Eventually, Marty was prosecuted on the following charges: abuse of power and illegal enforcement of authority, infringement on personal property rights, harassment and coercion, exploiting authority for personal gain. When the week-long trial ended, the court issued its verdict: a $150,000 fine for abusing power and infringing on personal property rights. This sum would be used to compensate residents who were bullied and wrongly fined by the HOA. I also received $50,000 in compensation for mental distress and legal costs. A permanent ban from holding any position in any HOA organization in the future. This means Marty will never again be allowed to manage or hold authority in any residential community. A 6-month suspended jail sentence and 200 hours of community service. This means she wouldn't go to jail immediately. But if she violated any law during those 6 months, she would serve her sentence right away. She was required to publicly post an apology letter to all residents in the neighborhood, admitting her wrongdoing and her abuse of power. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Marty slumped in her seat. The former HOA members quietly left, none daring to look back. As for me, I didn't feel joyful. I only felt that everything had returned to its rightful place. One late afternoon, while I was sitting and sipping whiskey on my porch, a neighbor came up and asked, "Carter, aren't you feeling triumphant?" I set my glass down, looked at him, then looked out at the neighborhood, which had become calmer than before. The roads were clean, with no one wearing the HOA's uniform of power to manipulate the residents. "I don't need to feel triumphant," I said slowly. "I just need to know that justice has been served." He smiled, nodded, then walked away. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the evening breeze, and knew that although this battle was over, I would always be ready for anyone who dared to challenge me again. When everything settled, I sat back and reflected on the deep lessons I took away from this experience. It was a lesson about power, justice, and patience. First, I realized that power can be abused, especially when it isn't controlled and overseen fairly. Marty and the HOA, with their power in the neighborhood, acted as though they were lords, deciding everything without following legal regulations. They believed they could do anything without consequences. But I proved that no one has the right to go beyond the law, and every wrongdoing will have a price. Second, I learned that justice must always be protected, no matter the situation. When I stood up to the HOA's actions, I wasn't just protecting my own interests, but also showing that no one can infringe upon someone else's lawful ownership. This wasn't only about my Lamborghini, it was about the basic rights of every individual in society. Sometimes, a simple act of standing up for one's rights can bring about significant change. Finally, I understood that patience and wisdom win in such confrontations. While Marty and the whole security rushed into action carelessly and impulsively, I chose to stay calm and wait. I didn't react hastily. I patiently awaited the right moment to reveal my true power. And when that moment came, I not only won but also left a valuable lesson for the whole community. After the lawsuit, the residents in the neighborhood realized they weren't mere underdogs in this community. They didn't have to live under the impositions of a group of people claiming to be in power. The dissolution of the HOA opened a new chapter, where residents could freely decide on neighborhood matters without fear of harassment from power-abusing individuals. Those who once stayed silent out of fear of the HOA's power saw the strength of unity and respecting everyone's rights. They understood that a community can't rely solely on the control of a few individuals. It requires fairness, respect, and transparency in all decisions. For me, this wasn't just a personal victory, but a victory for individual freedom and justice. It reminded me that nothing can replace the value of respecting the law and each person's rights. What would you do if such an hole appeared in your neighborhood? Would you accept their unreasonable rules, or would you stand up to protect your rights? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. And where are you watching this video from? I'd love to hear your stories and how an HO or similar organizations have affected your life. If you enjoy stories about justice, power, and real-life lessons like this, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any upcoming videos. The journey isn't over yet, and I'm sure you won't want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next video.